Amy. Although your name seems to be Sean, so I'll use it interchangeably. It's very inclusive already off the bat. So happy Coaches Week, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and to talk with you guys today. Um, I think what's really important to understand from the onset, as like Amy has mentioned, at the end of this, about 7 o'clock, hoping to open it up and hear from you guys, either to answer some questions or really for you guys to kick around strategies and share your experiences with one another. I'm not a coach, so your coaching expertise. My goal tonight is like when I'm working with corporate professionals or teachers or educators is to give the information so that you guys can adapt it to whatever needs that you require. So if there are questions along the way, hopefully maybe Amy, you can monitor that and shoot them out as we go. If it gets a little unwieldy, then we'll hold them to the end. But really, ideally, have a bit of a conversation, especially with the expertise and the experience in this room. I think would be very, very valuable. Okay, so this is the slide I have on every presentation. It's just Hexagon Psychology, and basically we're a private psychology clinic. We work federally. We're all across Canada, and obviously it's the basic kind of typical clinic with assessments, education assessments, mental health assessments, ADHD assessments, and counseling therapy and things like that. And part of what lots of us do is presentations, depending on our area of expertise or knowledge. So the first thing that we're going to do tonight, and this is going to be a little bit of a review or old hat, I think, for Amy and maybe some of you that are listening that heard me speak before. My goal is to talk about ADHD generally so that everyone's on the same page around what ADHD is and what it isn't. I think one of the important things for that is so that we can understand the athletes that you guys work with a little bit better, or for those of you who have kids. Amy mentioned earlier about a coach who's coaching little kids, and just how frustrating that can be sometimes. So we're going to talk about ADHD. We're going to talk about executive functioning. So we're all coming from a shared understanding. And part of that is opening up the idea of compassion and really understanding that people with ADHD aren't trying to have symptoms of ADHD, and it can be debilitating at times. Then we're going to move into a conversation around some strategies and some things for coaches and support staff, or staff that are supporting these athletes can try and experiment with and adapt and make their own. And hopefully that then leads into a conversation with all of us for the last little bit. Okay, so the prevalence when it comes to ADHD is about 7 to 8% roughly in North America. That hasn't changed in the last few years, and it's approximately about 5% in adulthood. There's different reasons why. Typically, what happens when you get into adulthood, the impulsivity goes down a little bit, and so people think that they no longer have ADHD. But really, ADHD in adulthood, from child to adolescent to adulthood, it morphs a little bit. And so really the number doesn't really change, but because there's not such a significant behavioral impact, it seems to go down in adulthood. One of the things to know, especially when you're working with young, like youth, and if you're looking for ADHD symptoms, it's boys are typically diagnosed at the rate of 3 times compared to girls. And that only reason that is because boys have a different behavioral manifestation of the symptoms. Boys typically, and guys, this is not true of all boys and it's not true of all girls. But typically boys are a little more behavioral and they're a little more energetic. So they're a little more impulsive. And so they're the boys that are like, clicking their pens in the back of the classroom. They're throwing their pencils up and it's getting stuck in the ceiling of the classroom. So they get identified a little bit quicker because they're the distraction. Typically, not all the time, but girls, if they have ADHD, they are often more on the inattentive side. So they're the wallflowers in the back of the class who look like they're paying attention, but they're not. They're daydreaming and drifting off. Again, I want to reiterate, not true of all boys and not all girls. So if any of you kind of do a soundbite and put this on the internet that I'm being sexist, I'm putting in the caveats now that it's not true all the time for all girls and all boys. But you can't cancel me because I don't have an internet presence really, so it'll be fine. Okay, the reason why women close the gap in adulthood is because we identify them better. They have more understanding of themselves. There's more education around it, and so unfortunately, with females, they get diagnosis later, and that's unfortunate because it's a bit of a wait to fail. They go through high school and post-secondary and their life struggling before they go, wait a minute, like what's going on here? I might have ADHD, and it's kind of it's a sad state of affairs, really. In the number fluctuates a little bit, but the literature is clear. There's a higher propensity of people with ADHD who are athletes compared to the general population. So most studies are saying that athlete populations, high performing athlete populations, are about 8 to 10, close to 10%, whereas the general population is 7 to 8%. So it does go up for a variety of reasons. Okay, ADHD is a developmental disorder, so it starts in childhood, and lots of people would argue you have to have symptoms in childhood for it to be an accurate diagnosis. And essentially, if you boil it all down, ADHD is an inability or difficulty to consider future consequences. Okay, so people with ADHD are basically lagging in two fundamental ways, and that's behavioral inhibition. Okay, so an ability to stop a proponent response, which we'll talk about, as well as attention. So the inhibition piece is that impulsivity, and the attention obviously is that inattention. Okay, theoretically, it's one and the same. Basically, you have impulsive attention or you have impulsive body. Either way, it's all impulsivity. I'm impulsive with what I'm paying attention to, or I'm impulsive that I'm clicking my pen and driving you guys nuts. Okay. Now, it doesn't matter, but the way we diagnose, the way we look at it is often inattentive type, impulsive type, or combined type. We only do that so that people that are working with people with ADHD or people that have ADHD understand what their behavioral manifestation is, but the clinical underpinnings of the brain, the developmental disorder itself, is not different from one to the other. Watch the time. Okay, so difficulties of the frontal lobe. So ADHD is an issue of the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, and this is essentially the part of our brain that governs our communication, our organization, and our goal-directed persistence. So oftentimes by the way, I should also say a caveat. I try to do this every time. I'm going to talk about things that are human. That's just what makes us tick. We all have symptoms of all the things under the sun on any given day. Okay, so I have ADHD symptoms on a Friday because I don't want to be at work anymore. I have ADHD symptoms on Monday because I don't want to be at work anymore. Tuesday to Thursday, not bad. Okay, my point is, depending on what's going on in our life, our age, stressors, all sorts of stuff, we have ADHD symptoms because it's a human behavioral thing. Where it becomes diagnosable is when there's functional impairment. So I can be scatterbrained all I want, I can be forgetful, but if I'm not late, if I don't lose jobs, if I'm not getting in trouble, then there's no functional impairment. A diagnosis has to have a functional impairment. Lots of us have symptoms of all sorts of stuff, but if there's no functional impairment in your day-to-day life, there's no diagnosis to be had. So the reason I'm saying that is oftentimes when I present, especially when I'm presenting to parents of kids with ADHD or with parents generally, they all run out thinking that they have ADHD and they all freak out a little bit because it's going to sound like we all have ADHD, but we don't. Okay, ADHD interferes with irrelevant stimuli. Essentially, what is happening is it's a bit of a filtering system, and we'll talk about this a little bit later and throughout. But essentially, people with ADHD are paying attention to everything and therefore nothing at once, and that they're not selecting the stimulus in their environment that is in their best interest for whatever goal they've decided that they're going to direct their attention toward. Working memory is a huge lagging skill when it comes to ADHD. Essentially, working memory, for those people who have ADHD, they struggle to follow multi-step instructions. So think of people where, you tell them to, I think of kids, go upstairs, brush your hair, comb your hair, brush your teeth, wash your face, bring down your dirty laundry, and then all of a sudden they come down the stairs and they've done none of it, right? Or you ask a colleague, hey, can you, while you're out on the other side of the office, can you bring A, B, C, and D back to me? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then they come back and they brought none of it. Okay, it can be a working memory issue and capacity. All of us on any given day can be forgetful, but working memory is very important for things like reading comprehension, following multi-step instructions, remembering someone's phone number, math problem solving. When it comes to coaching, multi-step instruction when it comes to your practice plan or your training approach, that can be interfering if you have working memory and or ADHD. And the biggest thing that we're going to talk about that's really important for educators and coaches and parents to understand, and people with ADHD to understand, is that ADHD impacts and interferes with executive functioning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about executive functioning in the clinical capacity sense, the brain process sense. And then what I'm going to do is drill down into actual executive skills that are often impacted by ADHD. And that's where then your interventions are designed to support those lagging skills. Okay. Okay, so these are essentially the symptoms. I'm not going to go over this too much, but they're here. I'm going to talk more about these in athletes a little bit later. But essentially, the list on the left is the inattention type of symptoms that we look for, and the list on the right is the impulsivity. Okay, so just take a minute here, and we'll look at a few, and just think of some of the athletes that you support and what you see in them. Okay, and again, all of us do this some of the time, so not everyone has ADHD. But if you think about listening on the left side, their third one down, listening or mind seems elsewhere, right? As coaches, as parents, as educators, as leaders, it can be frustrating to be, doing a coaching plan or a skill instruction, or, for me, it was hockey. So putting a play up on the glass or on the whiteboard and people not listening or fidgeting, that can be very, very distracting to the coach. It can be distracting to other players if it's a team kind of a group atmosphere. And a lot of people can take it as disrespect, right? And now you're disrespecting me, and now I'm going to come down on you. And I remember back in the hockey days, it was usually line up on the boards and here we go. So, we're going to talk a little bit about things like that in the intervention side when we get there. Losing or misplacing things, this is really frustrating for adults that are like this. So for me personally, just to give you part of myself, my belt and my hat, I have no idea. It takes me only 3 minutes to find it because it's only in one of four places, but I don't leave myself 45 seconds to find it. So when I'm going to fly out the door to be like exactly on time, if I can't find my belt, it's just made me 2 minutes late. Now you'd think as a grown man and a psychologist, I would like leave the door 2 minutes early, but I don't. So I don't know what that's about. But losing or misplacing things is really frustrating for people who do it consistently, and it makes them late. And then now again, they're late to practice, they're late to a training, that it seems disrespectful, they're letting their teammates down. And so they start to internalize a level of inner critic or a level of guilt that can impact their self-esteem and their performance. So these kinds of things, although they seem kind of straightforward, can really impact an athlete's sense of self, which obviously can have an impact on their performance. Because if athletes aren't in the right mindset, their performance is diminished, as you guys would know better than I would. Okay. We all know people. None of us think we're the people, though. Like, none of us think we're the ones, but we all know people that talk too much and you can't even get out of the conversation. I have a few friends and colleagues like this, and they're brilliant, and I love them. But like, holy like, you need to calm down. And they sometimes miss the social cues that I'm like, oh, okay, good, and try to like back out of the office, and they're just completely going forward. I think of for those of you that are old enough or that like to watch nostalgic shows, I think of the Seinfeld episode. For those of you know who the show Seinfeld was, there was an episode in there about the close talker. And basically, with people with ADHD, they can often be close talkers because they're missing the visual cues that I'm backing up or making a little bit more personal distance, and they don't see that. So they keep stepping forward. Not true of all people with ADHD, but these are the kind of social things that people with ADHD can sometimes miss, and therefore impacting their social interactions and making things a little bit hard on themselves. Okay. So, one of the things that, like I said, I'm going to talk about is executive functioning. But one way to look at this with athletes, and I don't like saying this word. I don't know why. It just makes me uncomfortable because I don't fully believe it's the issue. But the literature mentions this a lot. If you want to think of ADHD, it's essentially an issue with self-discipline because it's about gratification in the moment. People with ADHD like reinforcement right now, here and now. And so, as we all know, in order to function really well in life, it takes discipline, right? Do I really want to be writing a 15-page report on someone who's been assessed, or would I rather be WhatsApping with my buddies? WhatsApping with my buddies for sure. So depending on my day, my stress level, I'm zoning out WhatsApping with my buddies or scrolling through TikTok videos that I don't even know what I'm watching. Why? Because I'm procrastinating because I don't feel like dealing with the frustration of writing the report. Now, is that ADHD? Maybe. Or is it just a Friday and I don't want to write a report? Okay. So it's a self-discipline issue if you want to think of it that way. But I just don't like that language. All right, is it a new fad? No, I hear this all the time, so I always make sure that I put this in the presentation. We've been studying ADHD. ADHD has been studied for the last couple hundred years, and so it's not a new fad. The reason I put it in is because every time I do a presentation or when I'm working in the clinic, I always have someone come in and be like, "That's a new thing. Everyone's got ADHD, and it's a TikTok issue, and blah 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 blah." For sure. And now that my phone's right beside me, I'm gonna get all TikTok videos about ADHD tonight now. But regardless, it's not a new thing. What really is new in the literature is that they realize that ADHD is an executive functioning issue, and that came to fruition in the 90s. One of the things that I really like is in 1902. Could you imagine being a parent of a kid diagnosed? Because these, by the way, in these days, these were the boys that were like duct taped to desks in the one room schoolhouse. These were the boys that were like had to put their like nose in the corner and stuff like that. But the one I like the best is in 1902. They describe children with defective moral control. And so could you imagine like the school calling you in as a parent and be like, "We got some news for you. Your kid has defective moral control." And as we get more literature and as we understand it, we realize it's an issue of the frontal lobe. Okay. One of the things is stimulant medication. This is the other thing that I talk about that you should know. Stimulant medication is the most, ADHD medication, which is usually stimulant medication, is one of the most widely studied psychiatric medication out there. They've been studying it for over 70 years. And so there's a lot of stigma and bias around medication and big pharmaceutical companies in general. I just watched the documentary last night, or started to watch this docu-series on OxyContin and what is it, Purdue or whatever the drug company was. And so it's like, it is kind of freaky. But ADHD meds have been studied for over 70 years, and they're very safe if used properly. Okay, moving along. Well, now what I think is important for you to understand is that ADHD, the frontal lobe, is your air traffic controller. It's what manages your time. It's what plans things. It's what organizes things. It's what organizes your materials. It organizes your thoughts, your speech. It's why you look across the road when you're going to cross the road. Think of it as your air traffic controller. Now, what ADHD is essentially is that the air traffic controller at times is a little bit asleep at the wheel. So again, for me to get here on time, or for all of you to get here on time, this started weeks ago. Actually, it started in the summer for Amy and I. So to get here at 6 o'clock, it seems easy, but I had to manage my day from this morning. I had to have my shower, I had to do my hair, I had to go see clients, I had to do all sorts of stuff. I had to manage my dog, my kids. I had to land a whole bunch of airplanes in the right order at the right time in order to get here on time. You guys are no different. So do I have time to eat? Or do I have to cut out eating and not have a shower because I don't have time to have a shower to get to a meeting on time? People with ADHD are like, "Oh, I need to eat breakfast. Oh, I'm going to stop at Starbucks and I'm going to do this." And then they show up to a meeting 20 minutes late and they're like, "Oh, I'm late? Weird." And they don't even realize it. And meanwhile, you're like, "How the hell did you have time to go to Starbucks?" Right? So think of it like an air traffic controller that's a little bit asleep at the wheel. So the planes, which is to say priorities, are not landing at the right time in the right sequence. Okay. I could do this presentation. That's not a big deal. I have the knowledge to do it. But if I didn't get here on the right day at the right time with the right population, then who cares? Okay. That's essentially what your frontal lobe does. Okay, this is about neuroplasticity and brain development. Essentially, what happens in our brain, our frontal lobe and our executive skills don't come to fruition until about 25 years of age, roughly, some plus or minus a couple of years. For men in particular, our frontal lobe develops a little bit slower than our female counterparts. Again, not true of every male or every female, but as a group distribution, the group of men seem to, on a whole, lag a couple years behind in their frontal lobe development. It's why in Alberta, at least, men pay higher insurance until they're 25 years of age because, let's be honest, I had my first stunting ticket when I was like, I was 16 and I had my license for like a day and I already had a stunting ticket. And so I squealed my tires out front of the police station in Claresholm. And then when I got a ticket, I was like, "Oh my God." That's because I had no frontal lobe. Well, I had a frontal lobe, it just wasn't working. Okay. So when it comes to young athletes, when it comes to adolescents, when it comes to children, when it comes to even athletes in their early 20s, neuroplasticity is a real thing. The brain is still growing. That's why it's like Groundhog Day. And we keep helping them with the tools and the skills and the conversations and structuring their environment, because over time, they're going to be able to use their own tools as long as we keep giving them the tools. The brain doesn't stop developing until about that age. So it's really important not to give up and to keep kind of pushing interventions. Okay, impacts in sports and participation. So again, this oppositional behavior is a little bit more of a like a child adolescent diagnosis, but essentially with adults, what you're going to see is they're sometimes, this is not true of all people with ADHD, but they can be a little more conflictual or argumentative. Okay, sometimes that's because of impulsivity. We would all love to tell people how to go and where to get there for sure, but most of us don't unless we really need to. So with ADHD, if you're a little bit more impulsive, then it's likely or more likely that you're going to say things that you're thinking that you shouldn't have been saying. And so you get yourself into arguments and more conflict. The other thing that happens with people with ADHD, it's essentially a diagnosis. And this is not true. It is definitely not true, but it's what happens is that you internalize a level of kind of incompetence because your whole life, beginning basically in kindergarten or preschool, you're kind of told indirectly that you're not measuring up. You need to sit still. You're in kindergarten now. You need to sit in the blue circle. Why are you not sitting in the blue circle? I told you to stop fidgeting, stop running in the hallway, take your hat off. How many times do I have to tell you to bring your pencil crayons to school? And this goes all the way up until your adulthood, right? So part of the argumentative and the conflictual or oppositional attitude sometimes that you can get from some people with ADHD is an ego defense. And so you have to be pretty confident and assured of yourself to be able to listen and take feedback and not be reactive. When we're reactive or defensive, it's oftentimes because we don't want to look inward because our ego has been battered enough. So we have an ego defense, which can come off as argumentative and conflictual. Not true of all people that are argumentative and conflictual, but they're more susceptible to it. Okay, for those of you that coach athletes with ADHD, sometimes they can lack frustration tolerance, right? Again, frustrations, we all feel emotions, but who are the ones that whip their pen across or, throw, again, throw hockey sticks off the bench, break their hockey sticks, goalies, snap shows, breaking their sticks over the crossbar, all sorts of stuff. So they often lack or struggle with frustration tolerance. Mood lability is just saying that their moods go up and down. They can be very reactive at times. They have low lows at times and high highs often, okay? Poor self-esteem, as I mentioned. Substance abuse is way higher in people who have ADHD because two things really. One is like booze, for example, alcohol is biphasic. So in the moment, it stimulates you, which is to say it stimulates your frontal lobe. You're on, you feel good. It covers up your low self-esteem. You're more outgoing. You're not worrying about certain things. And then the biphasic part of it is there's a crash afterwards and you feel like shit. For anyone that's had a hangover, it's not pleasant and there's anxiety often involved with it. So substance abuse goes way up with people with ADHD, often to medicate other things. So then the other thing that you're mostly going to see is lack of focus and concentration during practice, during drills, workouts, and performance, and academic difficulties. So athletes that are like student athletes, university athletes, college athletes, kudos to them for driving forward, but they do need a lot of help because they're trying to balance school and athletics. And so those two environments can be really stress inducing because there's a lot of things like time management, prioritization, and organizational things that need to occur in order to be successful, not only in one domain, but across domains. So student athletes, high performing student athletes, require quite a bit of support across environments in order for them to be successful up to their true potential. Remember, you guys, the one thing to really think about is ADHD is by far not an intellectual issue at all. It's not a problem-solving issue. It's not an issue of knowledge. And that's why, unfortunately, even with young adults and teenagers and kids, we put them in interventions that are like, just give them more social skills and more anger management skills and more organizational skills and all kinds of stuff. It's a point of performance issue. It's not a lack of knowledge. People with ADHD are often very bright and can think very quickly. So it's not an intellectual issue, but it is a cognitive issue. Very intelligent. The motor, the engine of the race car is perfect, but it's the steering system and the braking system that can be a little bit lagging sometimes. So that's something to remember when you're supporting your athletes.
Sorry, John, we have a couple of questions here.
Yeah, sure.
In regards to the mood, do you think that's part of the self-frustration or other influences?
So I'll get to a slide in a second here, but
okay.
With ADHD, there's lots of comorbidity, which is basically saying if you have ADHD, you're far more susceptible or at risk of developing anxiety disorders, depression. The two that go hand in hand, or the three, are substances, anxiety, and depression. This is not true of all people with ADHD, but they're more likely to have these kinds of symptoms. So if you think about anxiety, you could be really jacked up, and depression, you're really, really low. So that's kind of where the mood lability comes from. It's often a self-esteem thing. Again, you have anxiety. If you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, you're always waiting to get in shit from the teacher, part of my language. Not really, actually. I'll probably swear a little bit more. If you're always waiting to get in trouble, if you're always wondering that you forgot something or who's going to give you trouble, then it's going to cause you some anxiety. And for any of us, if we're anxious for too long, if we're worried too long, or doubt our performance too long, we can't ride that high with our cortisol levels. So depression kind of comes in behind anxiety. So if you're anxious too long, you will absolutely develop depression. That's why treating anxiety is really, really important before it becomes depression. Did
I
that?
think that's good, I think, for now, John. Thanks.
Okay. Where was I? Oh, mental health concerns. So yeah, mental health, people with ADHD are more susceptible to mental health issues, more susceptible to addiction issues. Nicotine is something that people with ADHD seem to be drawn to. The nicotine, it's obviously addictive, but the nicotine helps people focus. And same with caffeine, right? Most of us, a lot of us, why do we drink caffeine? Because we feel it gives us energy. It doesn't really give us energy per se. It actually wakes up our frontal lobe. And then when our frontal lobe's woken up, we can prioritize and nothing seems as daunting, right? When it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 6:30 in the morning or whatever, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have all this stuff to do today. Oh, geez, don't talk to me. My kids are driving me nuts. Then I have a cup of coffee. I wake up and I'm like, oh, I can nail this, and this. 2 o'clock hits. I'm like, oh my God, well, this day's never over. Cup of coffee. Oh, I'm almost done my day. It's not energy per se. It's my frontal lobe is no longer has any kind of like fog or cobwebs to it. So now my day doesn't seem as daunting, mainly because I can prioritize and task and persist in my tasks. Okay, so that's what nicotine does as well. One of the scary kind of things, especially for those of you who have teens with ADHD, medication is a really important thing to consider, especially when they start driving, teenage pregnancies, and things like that. All right, this slide's a mess. I love it. No one else does, but I'm keeping it. That's part of my own opposition. This is basically just showing how executive functions develop over our lifespan. Behavioral inhibition is the first thing that develops when we're babies, and that leads to the next things that develop, which is our working memory, our self-regulation, internalization of speech, and what's called reconstitution. All those things happen in our frontal lobe, and then they produce an output. And there is no such thing as ADHD until it interferes with the output. So the output is that motor control. Okay. So I can sit here and do nothing. It's not until I knock my water over that I potentially am impulsive. It's not till I start clicking my pen that I'm not only impulsive, but I'm also inattentive because I'm not paying attention to annoying you guys with my pen. Okay. It's not until I walk into the wall for the 15th time with my shoulder and get hit by a car on my bike for the 3rd time that it becomes ADHD. Okay, so that's what the motor control piece is there. All right, behavioral inhibition is the foundation for all their skills. This is a huge lagging skill for people with ADHD. They're not doing it to just piss you off, and they're not doing it on purpose. Essentially, what's happening is once someone with ADHD has a thought, right, they do it. They go for it. For those of us when we're driving, and if you see a yellow light, what most of us do is stop. Some of us go, I'm gonna gun it, and then we're like, ooh, better not stop. The reason we do that is because we have an impulse and then we really calculate whether it's worth it. And then we make a guided self-led decision. People with ADHD often have a thought and it's gone. If they're like, oh, yellow light, I'm going to press the gas. They've pressed the gas and they don't realize they shouldn't have until they've been T-boned. Okay. So that's kind of the thing to think about with behavioral inhibition. If we cannot stop our initial thought or action, we're in some serious trouble sometimes. Okay. If I shouldn't, I don't know. I always talk about driving. I shouldn't honk my horn and flip someone the middle finger who won't get out of the left lane. I probably shouldn't do that. 99 out of times out of 100, I don't do that. Sometimes we all do that. That's a behavioral inhibition issue. Okay. So when it comes to athletes, interrupting the coach while they're trying to teach, interrupting other teammates if it's a team or a group setting, because really, if you think about it, it's kind of the person who, puts their hand up, keeps putting their hand up, and the coach or the teacher like sees them and is waiting for a time to intervene, or the kid that's always like, for those of you who have kids, mom, or dad, and they don't see that the strategy is not working. This is a behavioral inhibition thing. coaches that are trying to explain a drill or a skill, right? The player's like, yeah, I got it, and off they go. And you're like, I wasn't even done explaining. Yeah, I thought I got it. I know what you're gonna say. Well, no, you don't, and they've screwed up the drill. Now what happens? They get negative feedback, and that's a behavioral inhibition issue. The other thing that happens with inattention, with the interference control, basically right now I'm sitting in my room, I'm not at my office, and I can see things out of the side of my eye, corner of my eye, out the window. However, and I can see someone leaning up in their chair. However, as I'm talking, I'm able to filter out that extraneous stimuli. That's interfering, potentially interfering with what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to stay on top of today, especially with time. So if I get distracted, which is to say squirrel out my window, the next thing you know, I'm talking about squirrels. I lost my train of thought. Now I'm frustrated because I don't even know what I'm talking about. Or a coach has said, okay, you got it, you're ready, off you go, do the drill. And I'm like, oh shit. Why? Because I got distracted because my frontal lobe is not filtering out efficiently enough the extraneous stimuli that's interfering with my control of my attention. Okay. Behavioral inhibition is ADHD. If you know nothing else, this is what ADHD is. This slide. Nonverbal working memory. This is basically holding events in mind. This is visualizing things. The reason I don't run a red light is because I did it last year and I got a $300 ticket and that hurt the wallet, and I never heard the end of it. So now when I see a yellow light, I always want to gun it, but guess what? I don't. And in part, I instantaneously go, I'm not dealing with that shit again, so I'm stopping. Okay. So for any of us to manage our day-to-day lives as athletes or anything else, we need to be able to hold visual representations of our past behaviors in our mind, and we have to be able to predict the future in an instant to make a decision in the here and now. Okay. The last time I was dicking around in a line at hockey, I got sent to I actually had to go, or I was late actually. I had to stand in the middle of the rink on the faceoff dot, and my teammates got what they used to call, is probably not appropriate now, bag skated all around the ice. And I had to sit there. And every time I went to go skate with my teammates, my coach was like, if you go skate with them, we're doing this longer. Okay. So guess what? I was never late again in hockey. Okay. Because I could picture that. I can remember the sensation of feeling guilty, letting my teammates down. So guess what? I was always early for hockey after that. It's because my frontal lobe can hold that visual in mind and predict what might happen if I'm late again. So I wasn't. The other thing is self-regulation of affect. So again, this is a lagging skill. People with ADHD, they're typically far more reactive. And they have a hard time managing their emotions. Okay. We all have emotions. Not all of us act on those emotions. People with ADHD, again, because the filtering system, they get frustrated, they throw the water across the floor. Not all people with ADHD, but that's self-regulation. If you think about our emotions, we feel emotions, and our emotions are designed to move us toward or away from something, fight or flight. People with ADHD are less able, some of them are less able to manage those emotions. So they're always flighting or fighting, and it seems reactive. And that's because there's a filtering system with their emotions and how they can control them. Internalization of speech. Think of this. I know I'm moving really quickly, you guys. Internalization of speech is what goes with the nonverbal working memory. That's the visual representation. This is the verbal stuff that goes with the visual stuff. This is the music or the audio that goes with the movie. Okay, it's our running dialogue. It's our thoughts. Okay, the reason why my daughter doesn't pull the dog's tail is because I say to her, Andy, don't pull the dog's tail. Eventually she says, Andy, don't pull the dog's tail. She starts to internalize that. Then she's like, I shouldn't pull the dog's tail. And eventually at the age of 3 or 4, she just starts thinking. She doesn't say it out loud anymore. She just doesn't pull the dog's tail. Why? Because she goes, oh, I shouldn't pull the dog's tail. That would be rude. What used to be our moms, our dads, our caregivers, our aunts, our uncles, our coaches, what used to be their language toward us is now internalized as our own, and we call it thinking. So for some of you guys that are really critical of yourselves or really down on yourselves or really positive with yourself, you didn't get that by yourself. You picked it up from somewhere. Okay. Why do I always have issues driving? I'll tell you why. Because every time my mom and dad come over, they're complaining about the drivers in this world. And then I'm like, oh shit, I get where I get it from. I've internalized that. Okay. So this is why coaching and mentoring is hugely important in how we use our language and how we use our voice. Okay. Because we internalize that, and that becomes our self-image. If I was raised by my parents to be told I'm awesome, then I'm more likely to try out for AAA teams, dub teams, and all sorts of stuff. If I'm told I suck and I'm not capable of anything, guess what? I'm not going to try anything. Okay. So language and the way you talk to your athletes is hugely important because this is a lagging skill of theirs. Reconstitution, this slide just means basically that people with ADHD are more likely to get stuck and rigid in their thinking, right? If you told me to be there at 2 o'clock and now you're saying 3 o'clock and we have to stop someone somewhere first, I don't like that. Why are you doing that? And so they have a hard time with the fluidity in which they problem solve. Okay. You told us that we are going to be on this at 2 o'clock, and now you're telling me it's 3 o'clock, and they just have a hard time sometimes managing that. So having them go through certain scenarios and almost like role playing and giving them a heads up of like, hey, here's what we're doing on Saturday for the drill, but it is subject to change. So I just wanted to let you know that we could do A, B, C, or D. And so just keep that in your mind for Saturday because we might have to change some things. That helps people with ADHD wrap their head around change because some of them don't like that. Okay. Here's the treatment of ADHD. Medication is a gold standard intervention alongside behavioral modification. The reason why medication is really important is that it helps stimulate and use people's own brain, their own dopamine and norepinephrine. If I talk about the chemical filter system that I was kind of alluding to, basically all ADHD is lagging or lacking dopamine and norepinephrine. So basically, if you think about it right now, I'm speaking and I can see things like I said, but my brain's filtering that out. So that's the inattention piece. Okay. The impulsivity piece is I'm not spinning in my chair and I'm not clicking my pen and I'm not, I'm staying on track mostly. So what that means for athletes is that if you're talking to them and coaching with them, are they paying attention to you, or are they already going down the bobsled track or whatever it may be? Reason being is that the dopamine and norepinephrine act think of it like a neurotransmitter or a chemical screen. So instead of having a tight screen where it's filtering things out very efficiently, but it's also keeping things in, which is impulse control efficiently, it's not. The screen is like this. So impulsive things are coming out of the screen of the frontal lobe, and inattentive things are coming in the screen of the frontal lobe. What a stimulant medication does is it wakes up the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe has more access to dopamine and norepinephrine. So instead of a screen like this, it closes and makes a tighter screen. So your athlete has more ability to filter things out and control impulses. The thing that we're doing today is athlete and in particular coaching education. So this is a really important part of tonight. Okay. So essentially, the literature is really clear. When it comes to supporting athletes with ADHD, it is all about the coach's attitude and their belief and their coaching efficacy. So those coaches who have worked with people with ADHD in the past are far more comfortable working with people with ADHD, can recognize athletes with ADHD, and have more self-agency in how they believe that they're able to support someone with ADHD. For those coaches who know nothing about ADHD, they're a little bit more hesitant and doubtful of their ability to have an impact on athletes with ADHD. So it really is important for everyone that supports an athlete with ADHD to have some sort of education about it, because they're just far more supportive and design more supportive and inclusive environments. Amy, if you want to jump in, I know I'm rattling quickly, so if there's questions, let me know. If not, I'm going to keep going.
No, I think you're good. Yeah, we haven't had any questions. This is great. Keep hammering it out. It's good.
Okay. So Amy talked about this a little bit. Neurodiversity, essentially, basically, those with ADHD would be considered neurodiverse. All that really means is that the way their brains are wired and the way that they operate is a little bit outside of what we would typically expect, given a standard distribution in our society. So people with neurodiversity would be people with, say, autism, reading disabilities. Obviously, tonight we're talking about ADHD. Okay, so neurotypical is the typical standard distribution, and those that are outside the distribution of our society are considered neurodiverse. Talked about this. I'm not going to belabor that point too much. Same thing. This is hyperactivity, constantly fidgeting. One of the things to remember, you guys, when people are fidgeting and they're swaying in their chairs, or other than clicking pens, because that is kind of annoying, let them fidget as much as they can. Okay. That does help a lot of people pay attention. We all fidget to a degree. Everyone's moving a little bit. Everyone's tapping a toe. Everyone's spinning a little bit in a chair, twirling their hair. Everyone's doing a little bit of fidgeting, a little bit of movement. It's what focuses us. ADHD is just on the extreme side of that. Okay, so let people fidget if it's not being disruptive, and don't take it personal, and don't take it as disrespect. I see this all the time, especially with parents and kids or young athletes. It's like, sit up, sit straight, don't spin, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, just let them do their thing. If they're at the back of the line messing around a little bit and it's a little bit distracting to you, but it's not really disruptive, then do your best to let it go sometimes. Okay, these are the comorbid conditions that we talked about or alluded to a little bit earlier. The biggest ones with people with ADHD are often related to low self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. Okay, now being athletes combats this. So being an athlete in exercise and sports is an exceptional way to manage ADHD symptoms. So really, the literature is clear for those people who have ADHD; they need to be more active. Now, you guys are all in a position to know that your athletes who have ADHD, when they're performing, they do really quite well, I'm sure. It's everything around the sport that they sometimes struggle with. Okay, it's not the sport itself. People with ADHD, when it comes to sports, have higher levels of aggression and emotional reactivity, and team sports in particular seem to be a much harder area to navigate for people with ADHD. So this is something for coaches who are working with team sports or a group of individual athletes, but training as a group. People with ADHD, this is really hard for them oftentimes, because they often get really negative feedback for being off task, right? You're supposed to be working out. You're not. You're dicking around. You're supposed to be doing a drill, and I left and came back, and you're dicking around. So their peers, as well as the coaches, give them really critical feedback, again, thereby potentially damaging their self-esteem. Okay. We won't talk too much about this, but really, patience, lack of patience, waiting their turn. I always think of hockey, like people messing around in the lineup, waiting for the coach to explain things. In the weight room, same thing. People messing around, basically twirling in circles and bouncing into walls rather than following their training regime. Same thing, interrupting coaches, right? Think, oh yeah, I got it, and off they go down the ski hill, and it's like, I wasn't even finished telling you what I wanted to do. So interrupting people, making rash decisions. These are all things that you're going to see. Okay.
John, quick
Yeah.
question. So
Yeah.
how do you approach the feedback then if like an athlete is messing around or it is distracting the group, let's say, how can you maybe ask them to stop in a way that maybe they would remember or that's
Yeah.
respectful?
So typically, and it's in the other slides, which you guys can have further down, but essentially it's kind of like classroom management, like teachers do. So a lot of the literature and the interventions that is in sports, it's actually coming out of education. And essentially it's kind of like, if you have ADHD or an athlete with ADHD, where are you going to put them? So if you're teaching a drill, again, I'm just going to use hockey, but if you're teaching a drill, use them in the teaching. Let them be part of the teaching. Let them be the assistant or the support, or have them be the demonstrator, because it keeps them engaged. Have them at the front of the line. Often people with ADHD, they'll sneak to the back of the line. Sometimes it's a really good social skill to go third in line to watch what's happening. But people with ADHD tend to go, and sometimes anxiety, tend to go to the back of the lineups. Now they're more likely to be fidgeting or being disruptive. So move them to the front of the lineup. The other thing to do is, because they're adults, when they are being disruptive, having a little bit, without being condescending, but having a little bit of a signal to let them know, like, hey, you're kind of going over the line, because adults with ADHD don't want to have ADHD symptoms, so they mask them sometimes. So if you're noticing someone that's being disruptive, just give them that little cue, or that little whatever you need to do that you've agreed upon, so that you're not shaming them accidentally in front of their peers. And then the other thing to do, if you're going to give them critical feedback, really a rule of thumb is, what do they call it? This is probably not the appropriate term, but it's late. It's like a shit sandwich, right? You kind of give them praise, and then you give them some critical feedback, and then you give them some praise again, and that helps kind of bolster up their self-esteem, because you can't be a coach and not give critical feedback. So that's definitely not what we're saying here. But the rule of thumb is, and this study's been replicated numerous times, in our daily lives, even those of us don't have ADHD, about 85% of our day is receiving and giving critical feedback. It's how we're designed. It's part of our biology and evolution. It's really fascinating, but I don't have time to talk about that. It's essentially how we got here. Okay, having negative appraisal about our environment and potential dangers. Very smart people are often very negative people, because it's part of our evolution. So we're more likely to give negative feedback and forget about positive feedback, because if our athlete with ADHD is on task, we ignore them. If they're in the weight room and they're crushing out this in the squat rack, we don't say much. We're like, okay, good. We go to the other people who are being disruptive. Okay. So you want to make sure that you flip that stat on its head. People with ADHD are getting negative feedback about their performance 90 to 95% of their day, driving, in their personal lives, at work, at school, and in the sporting arena. So one of the things to really, really do is to make sure you're catching these athletes with ADHD doing things well. Don't just assume that they know they're doing well and then only catch them when they're not doing something well. Make sure you drive up the positive reinforcement and catching them doing things well. Make sure that number is at 90% of your feedback, so the 10% of the critical feedback is weathered by all the positive feedback. Okay, these are the executive functions, you guys, that are kind of spelt out a little bit. One of the things to think about is this gratification junkie. People with ADHD are in the moment. They want gratification in the moment. Okay, so that an intervention for that is giving feedback and praise and all sorts of things in the moment. Okay, so if you see them doing something well, give them praise in the moment. If you need to give them critical feedback because of undesirable behavior like being late, it's got to be in the moment. Okay, people with ADHD have a harder time delaying gratification. That's what impulsivity is. Okay. So when you think about when you're designing your plans, your training plans and new skill development, keep that in mind, because if they're standing around too long, or they're waiting too long, or the drill or the instructions too verbose, then they're going to lose their attention, and then they're not going to take it all in, because they want immediate reinforcement. They want the adrenaline. Essentially what they're looking for is the dopamine and norepinephrine that their brain's a little bit lagging in. That's why a lot of athletes who have ADHD, or people with ADHD, they go into high stakes things. Downhill ski racing, pilots are another one. So where there's or downhill mountain biking and bobsledding, all things that are fast and a little bit dangerous. They give people with ADHD norepinephrine and adrenaline, which is really that. Any of us that have, all of you guys that have played sports, it's in the zone. That's what we love about it. You're in the zone. That's why they're often more likely to join sports that have a high degree of adrenaline to them. Don't need that. Okay, time blindness is something that's really important, you guys, for two reasons. One, it's actually people with ADHD have a hard time with the concept of time. So for me to get here today or to get to my clinic on time this morning, I have to have a rough idea of how long it takes me to have a shower, how long it takes me to do my hair, 4 seconds. How long does it take me to have breakfast and walk my kids to school, walk the dog? How long does that take me? I don't think about that anymore. I just get up and I have my routine. Most of us are like, it takes an hour, it takes 2 hours, whatever it may be. It takes half an hour. But really what's happening in my brain and all of your brains and your athletes' brains is that our cognitive process is making these little micro decisions all day, every day, in order to get places on time, to get to training on time, to remember what did my coach tell me to do in the gym when I'm supposed to be doing dry land on my own, right? Time blindness is an inability or a difficulty to guess and estimate the time it's going to take to complete a task. And it's also an inability to make audibles as you go. I woke up late. I don't have time for breakfast and a shower. Which is it going to be? I'm going to have a shower. I'm going to skip breakfast. People with ADHD don't realize you're running out of time until it's too late. The other thing with time blindness, and this is a huge lagging skill with most people with ADHD. If you remember back to the slides I talked about with the executive functions of nonverbal working memory and verbal working memory, essentially what time blindness really is an inability and a lagging skill in being able to look back into the past, predict the potential future, right? Look back to the past of what happened last time I was in a similar situation, predict a future outcome depending on my decision to make an actual decision in the here and now. People with ADHD don't look into the past quick enough, and they don't predict the future fast enough, and they've already made a decision and it was a bad decision. And that's what time blindness is. We have to look into our past, predict the future to make good decisions, which could be mainly around managing our time and getting to places on time, remembering our stuff, remembering our equipment, remembering our materials, remembering the stuff that we need for, I don't know, video sessions when it comes to our coaches, etc. Okay. So essentially, when it comes to, say, working memory, it just seems like people who have lagging working memory, which is to say lots of theorists would say ADHD is only lagging working memory, is that people with ADHD can't seem to hold what they need in their frontal lobes long enough to reach the goal. Okay, so working memory is essentially this. If I gave you guys my phone numbers, you guys would go into your phone and you'd be like, oh yeah, what's his name? It's John. You would then go through your passwords on your phone and you'd be rehearsing my phone number in your head. You'd be like, it's 403-613, and then you go into your contacts. That is taxing your working memory. That is your working memory. Okay, so why this is really important for you guys as coaches is all of your athletes who have ADHD have lagging working memory. That is the way it is. They either have lagging working memory capacity at the brain level, or ADHD interferes with the brain's capacity to have working memory. Either way, it's a lagging skill in a practical sense. And so why that's important is that you need to talk, as I'm mowing through this, you need to talk less. You need to break down multi-step instructions. You need to have both visual cues, like visual instructions with verbal instructions, the best you can and whenever appropriate, and checking for understanding. Okay. Working memory is something that all of your athletes are going to struggle with. So can you give them, if you're going to learn a new skill on Thursday, can you give them the notes the night before? Can you have a mass email to your athletes that says, don't forget, don't be late on tomorrow at 9:00, and I expect you to bring your white belts or whatever it might be. Okay. Working memory is absolutely a hallmark lagging skill when it comes to people with ADHD. Performance monitoring is the other thing that's lagging people with ADHD. This is why people with ADHD often make the same mistake or what we call careless mistakes. In order for us to manage our performance when it comes to on and off, athletic performance, academic performance, we have to monitor it. Okay. Did I read the sentence right? Did I hear my coach right? Am I doing the drill? Am I going to look over at Amy, who she's doing the drill and doesn't look like what I'm doing? Am I going to adjust my performance? Am I paying attention to my own performance? And am I having some sort of critical appraisal of myself to adjust my performance? People with ADHD make careless mistakes and don't usually adjust for the performance because they're rushing through things, not realizing you're the only one in the lineup of 20 that's doing this wrong. And, oh, I didn't realize. How did you not? Everyone else realized and made the correction. Okay, organization. This is another lots of us are disorganized. This is another hallmark of people with ADHD. Again, whatever their sport is, they can do quite well. But guess what? They're late for practice again. They forgot their cleats. They forgot their hockey equipment. They forgot whatever sport you're talking. They forgot their skis. Right? Where's their stuff? I forgot it. It fell out of my bag. Why? I don't know. I just tossed my bag in the basement. Now I didn't realize I didn't have my gloves in there. Okay. So organization and helping and role modeling organization for you coaches that are good at it is a very helpful way to support people with ADHD. Okay. Help them make plans, verbalize what you expect of them. If you can, and if it's appropriate, depending on policies and culture and all sorts of stuff, does the team get a text? Does your athlete get a text to say, hey, don't forget your stuff tomorrow? It's an early start. All sorts of things. Some of you think that might be part of your coaching role, and some of you are like hell, I'm doing that. They're adults and they can figure out on themselves. But if you're going to help someone with ADHD, they need help with organizing their thoughts, structuring their environments, and reminders. Okay, task initiation, task completion. Here's the big one. This is procrastination. Okay, people with ADHD start a lot of tasks and they complete very little. Okay, so they start a whole bunch of stuff and nothing gets finished. Okay, also the thing that with ADHD with task completion, when it comes to task initiation, there's a lot of things that have to come and it's very complicated. I need to know where my computer is. I need to know where my files are. I need to know where my pen is. All of that stuff has to happen. It can be frustrating with people with ADHD because those are all reminders of I'm disorganized. So I don't want to start the task because now I'm just pissed off. I don't know where anything is and now I'm frustrated. So I'm not even going to do it. I'm just going to scroll on my phone. That's where procrastination comes in because again, I don't have the self-regulation to manage whatever I'm managing or getting to somewhere on time or managing all the information the coach gave to me and what I should be doing in the gym on my own. So instead, I don't feel like doing that. So I want immediate reinforcement. And guess what does that? My phone, TikTok, videos, Facebook, whatever, Instagram, whatever your age is. Okay. So procrastination and avoiding tasks and starting a lot of tasks but completing none is also a hallmark of ADHD. And that, again, is a dopamine and norepinephrine issue and a self-regulation issue. They're not doing it because they're lazy. Most people who procrastinate say, I'm just lazy. Or people that look at people that procrastinate, it's like, oh, they're just lazy. It is not a laziness thing. It's not even a motivation thing. It's lack of frustration tolerance, which is self-affect. and it's difficulty organizing the steps that need to come to fruition to make the plane land. Okay, it's dopamine and norepinephrine. All right. So when it comes to coaching considerations, most of the time, you guys as coaches, you don't even know if someone has ADHD. A lot of you would know your gut tells you this, or you have other experience with ADHD. So you're like, I think they have ADHD. But unfortunately, there's a big gap between education and coaching, where in education, teachers absolutely know which students have ADHD, but coaches do not. And I think it's a disservice. I really believe that coaches are maybe not entitled, but should, as a best practice in coaching, be aware of which athletes have ADHD so they can be accommodating and supportive and understand and be compassionate toward what people with ADHD are going through. So I believe it's really important, and the literature is clear in this, it's really important to meet with players or meet with your team or meet with your athletes one-to-one or as a group, whatever the situation may be for you, and kind of go over the rules and the expectations and the behavioral expectations, but also to let them know that if anyone has ADHD or anything that needs to be considered when it comes to their performance and you supporting them, that they need to come and let you know so that you guys can have a discussion on how you might best support them. Okay. And obviously, you want to provide a really respectful mechanism to do that, to have these confidential and private conversations. Unfortunately, in sport, because you're all alphas and you're all type A's, the issue is that there's still a stigma in sport around mental health and ADHD because it's seen as a weakness. And sports is the last place you want to be seen as weak. It's competitive. I don't have an issue. Well, no one's saying you have a major issue, but we could support you a little bit differently if I would have known. So it's really important for organizations, teams, et cetera, to develop a culture of understanding and education and inclusivity, because it breeds compassion and it minimizes stigma. And if we do that, then you guys can support your athletes a lot better, and they're not going to be so afraid to come to you with some of their issues. Um, so strategies to consider for you guys as coaches. For an athlete to be successful, the coach must provide an environment that stresses structure and organization. Okay. People with ADHD do really well with structure, routine, and predictability. Okay. So distractibility is a very significant part of ADHD. And so if you can have environments that are very organized, they're going to do a lot better. Okay. Same like we were talking about before. If you place your athlete with ADHD, if they're in a group, to the front of the line or right in front of you or part of the demonstration, they're going to do a lot better. The other thing to do as coaches is pair them with their peers that are high functioning in the executive functioning, because then what you really want to do, and social conformity is huge. If everyone else is doing this, then we're going to do this. We all think we're individuals. We want to stand out. We all want to do all sorts of stuff. It's not actually true. We want to be sheep. We don't want to be kicked out of the group. It's not in our best interest. We're going to die on the forest floor if we're not part of the group. So use that to your advantage without shaming or humiliating anyone. But if you pair people up, lagging time management with someone who's got good time management, or if I'm standing by Amy and a coach is giving us the drill and I'm fidgeting, and she just gives me a nudge because we have that relationship, then I'm like, oh yeah, shit, okay, good. Or from one drill to the next, all of a sudden we do a drill, the coach, blows the whistle, and I'm just like, oh, cool, I'm going to pick dandelions. Amy's going to be like, John, let's go. We got to get over for a water break. So pairing people up either in proximity, or even better yet, if the culture allowed for this, pairing people up together that the other person can be the extended or external frontal lobe, is a huge, huge benefit to people with ADHD. How you do this, though, is with dignity and respect and compassion and relationship, right? If Amy says to me, Amy pretty much can say whatever she wants to me. I'm like, oh, she's cool. I don't care. If I didn't know her and she's like, John, stop clicking your pen, I'd be like, well, who the hell are you, right? So relationship, team building, and all sorts of things are very important in order to use a peer support kind of model. So again, they benefit from structured environments and schedules. So this slide is really just talking about schedules. The reason why schedules is really important is because I don't have to think now with my nonverbal and verbal working memory. I have a schedule. I don't have to feel anxious about missing anything. When did Amy tell me to be here? I don't have to think about it because the team has a calendar or I have a calendar with my coach and it's scheduled. It's posted in the locker room. It's posted in the gym. It's posted in my bedroom. It's posted in my car. And then guess what? These phones apparently can be used for other things other than social media. So it's in my calendar and I've got an alarm on it. And my coach reminded me to put an alarm half an hour before I need to leave my house. All sorts of things. Okay. So scheduling helps predictability, which alleviates anxiety, which then helps people stay more focused and on track. Okay. Post the rules. Like I said, before practice, make sure you're giving things out if it's a complicated lesson or if you have some sort of rules to review, make sure that you're doing that with the entire team. So the person with ADHD is like, oh yeah, shit, I shouldn't be late because here's what's going to happen if the team is late. Here's the other thing that to think about when you guys are coaching and developing your practices and training and your trainings is that people with ADHD, your athletes with ADHD struggle with transitions, right? So they're focused, they're on it, they're dialed in. But the moment you're like, okay, give me 20 minutes, I got to go do something, or take a breather for 5 minutes, and then you get stuck on your phone. Well, guess what? Now your athletes are doing all sorts of stuff that's off track. Or you say something that's like, okay, hey, we're done on the ice. I'll meet you in the weight room. And between the ice and the weight room, who knows where the hell they got to. Okay. So people and athletes with ADHD struggle with transitions. So make the transition explicit and make it predictable. And don't be afraid to give very clear expectations and potential consequences for those transitions. I need you to be here in 5 minutes. I need you to be here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, of course. Where are you going? The weight room. Which weight room? Well, the one downstairs. No, I said the one upstairs. Oh shit, sorry. Right? Make sure that you use your relationship and don't be condescending, but be very clear and very concise and very direct on what you want when it comes to transition times. The other thing is the buddy system, like I talked about, is very similar to the peer system. The buddy system is just pairing people up. So if Amy and I are going to work out and we're in the far corner doing whatever the hell we're doing, really as a coach, you did that on purpose because Amy's not really going to let me dick around too much. A little bit, but then when the whistle goes, she's going to be like, all right, let's go. And we're back to the coach or we're back to the drawing board or whatever it may be. So buddy system, other than medication, is the number one intervention for ADHD. Now, you have to be strategic in how you do this because if you're just like, hey, John, you have ADHD, you're going with Amy because you're a shit show. That's probably not going to breed very inclusive or compassionate environment. So you have to be strategic with this, and you have to use your relationship. But pairing people or athletes together that have complementary skill sets is absolutely the way to go if you can do it. Okay, so when it comes to teaching, the actual teaching of the practice or the training session or whatever it may be, the people with ADHD and high performing people generally really benefit from a brisk pace, fast instruction, but break up longer. Like I think of football, if you have to teach an athlete some big complicated play or some complicated kind of theory, break it down into manageable chunks. Again, shorten your speech. Give them chunks, make them go do this part of the skill and come back, then go do this part of the skill and come back, go do this part of the skill and come back, and then boom, put it all together. That's going to help them increase their motivation and their concentration. Keep it high tempo. Okay. Teach using short time periods. This is another one that we don't do, but it's got huge efficacy, is use clocks. People with ADHD, like all of us at any given time, like some of you like tonight probably are like, okay, I got to go to 7:30. I only got to 7:30. Now 7:30 hits, we're like, oh, we made it. People with ADHD are even more like that. They're like, okay, I can hold it together. I can hold it together. I got my attention. Oh shit, when is this going to end? When is he going to stop talking? If you put a timeline on like, hey, we're going to do this for 20 minutes, or I'm going to talk for 5, then we're going to practice for 15, and then we're going to come back. If you put the timer up or use the scoreboard timer or make it explicit, it helps reduce the impact of time blindness, and it helps them take ownership over the time, and it helps them look at the time and be like, oh, there's only 2 more minutes. I got this. So it helps them regulate their impulsivity and their inattentiveness. So using timers, believe it or not, is a huge thing for athletes with ADHD. Okay, the other thing for you to think about, you guys, and again, have these slides, you can read through them, but try to make a genuine effort to change practice as best as you can from day to day, because basically what happens is when we start a practice, it's often like the same old starting of a practice. So it's some sort of like I don't know, mundane skill. So what you want to do is instead try starting your practice with some type of competitive drill so that the emotions already get up, right? So when you get onto the ice, or you get onto the track, or you get into the weight room, do something competitive, have some sort of competition, because already you're stimulating their athletic mind and you're stimulating their norepinephrine, their adrenaline, and their dopamine. So they're already now more focused if you start a practice session or a training session with some sort of competition. This is a huge thing for athletes with ADHD. It helps motivate them from the onset of practice, and you get buy-in right away. Okay, so try using a new drill or a skill or a competition that they haven't seen before, and that's a really good way to help athletes with ADHD. The other thing is positive reinforcement. Okay, so when you're giving positive reinforcement on drills, it helps keep the motivation and it helps keep them engaged. Okay, so again, catch them doing things well. Coaches are typically really good at this. This is what coaching is. Coaching is, it's psychology. Like, yes, you all know your sports really well, but good coaches, they're psychologists. They know how to motivate. They know how to deal with their athletes. They're really good, and they're good cheerleaders. They know when to be hard on their athletes and when to be just soft on their athletes. Good coaches really is about the brain and the mind and the relationship. So if you're going to give criticism and negative feedback, which you're going to have to do, make sure you do it kind of sandwiched between the positives. Okay, or else you're going to potentially mess with their mindset, because they do have ADHD, so they're used to getting critical feedback, and therefore they're used to getting their self-esteem a little bit kicked. So just be careful when you're thinking about that. If they come to you in the evening for training, they've had all day getting feedback about their ADHD. So make sure that you realize that they've had 90% of their day is negative feedback. Am I going to pile on this athlete? Yeah, I am a little bit, but I'm going to boost them up a little bit, and you're going to balance out that teeter-totter of negative feedback that they've got all day. You're going to at least get it back to neutral before you start giving them negative feedback. What else I need to know about this? I already talked about this stuff, you guys, but some of the stuff you want to talk about, like if you diet plans, nutrition plans, training plans, dryland training type plans, weight room plans, complicated skill development, all of that stuff. Again, you're going to teach it in the moment, but give them visuals, give them graphic organizers, give them checklists of things, technology, right? PowerPoint, doing presentations, if you're having classroom sessions and things like that, help them use their phone. Even with adults, like, did you put in your calendar? Oh no, shit, I didn't think about that. It's like, well, you're 40. When are you going to realize your phone has a calendar on it, right? So with dignity and respect, help them develop the structures and the routine and the processes in order to make their lives a little bit more efficient. Okay, binders, right? Checking in with dignity and respect. Hey, did you bring your binder today? We're going to work on this, and it's complicated skill. So I want you to read it a couple nights ago, and now we're going to talk about it. Oh yeah, I have my binder. Well, where is it? I want you to bring it to the practice or whatever it may be. These are all things that you can experiment with. Not all this is going to be appropriate depending on the sport or the athlete or the situation, but these are things that would be very helpful if you find the right mix for your athletes with ADHD. Okay, so then the last thing, this is the important thing we might get done on time. This is something to keep in mind when it comes to giving direct instruction. Okay, explain the importance of the task and make it clear that the athletes have to pay attention. So a lot of athletes and a lot of high performing people and people with ADHD are like, yeah, I get it, got it. All of us, to a person, we are more engaged and paying attention and more willing to do things when we know the utility behind it. Okay, think of any of you that know anyone in high school. They're typically like, I don't know, why do I need math? It's stupid, right? Middle school and high school kids, why do I need this? It's stupid. Why do I need to learn Macbeth? It's stupid. And arguably, maybe it is. However, the reason why that they think it's stupid is because they don't see the utility behind it. They don't see the importance behind it. So when you're working with athletes with ADHD, that's where they have a bit of a lagging skill. If they don't see the importance in it, they don't have as much buy-in. If they don't have as much buy-in, they're more susceptible to inattention. So explain the importance. Demonstrate. So this is just good education. It's good pedagogy. It's good coaching. Demonstrate the technique and explain it out loud, and then ask the players to repeat it. Did you get what I got? Yeah, I got it. So what are you going to do again? Oh, I'm going to do 3 laps. Okay, cool. No, I said 2, whatever it may be. Again, be authentic and don't be, don't patronize them, but make sure you check for understanding. The other thing is, coaches, what happens is we say something. We're like, all right, everyone got it. Go do it. We need to be able to repeat the instructions 2 or 3 times and say it in 2 or 3 different kind of ways, because people with ADHD often remember the beginning of a sentence or the end of a sentence. So if you can say it in a couple different ways, they're going to piece it together themselves. So don't just bark it once, bark it a few different ways. The other thing to do is always, as much as you can, and when appropriate, think about how it might work for your own athletes in your own situation, is pair written instructions with oral directions. Okay, that's part of like the whiteboard, right? X's and O's while talking. That's a visual representation with an oral representation. That's a mixed method approach, and you're going to get good gain for that as long as you're not doing too much of either. Okay, if you have rules for your team, rules for the gym, rules for being on time, give them written rules that are point form, and remind them verbally as well. Okay, if you are planning on teaching a large skill or concept or strategy or whatever it may be, make sure you're paring it down, you're chunking it, and you're using multi-step instructions. And so what happens there is you have actually more opportunity to give them positive feedback, right? They have more opportunity to practice the chunk of the skill, and then you bring it all together, and it will go a lot better. So if it's complicated or lengthy, break it down. Last thing I'll say is education is about understanding, and it's about compassion. That's what tonight's all about. It's giving you a whole bunch of information a little bit too quickly so that you realize that people with ADHD, it is a developmental issue, and they're not trying to be late. They're not trying to be interruptive. It's a dopamine and norepinephrine thing. So really understanding that. Let them fidget, okay, if it's not being too disruptive. So talk to them about fidgeting, right? What can you do? Sitting there spinning around and banging the boards isn't what to do, but what can they do to fidget? Or how can you put them in certain places in the environment where fidgeting is not going to be such an end all and be all? Basically, I said let them fidget in there because a lot of us as adults, we take fidgeting as not paying attention, and we take not paying attention as disrespect, and we take disrespect not very well, and now we come down on our athletes. Okay. It is not about you. It is not about disrespect. It's about their brain trying to regulate. That's why you see people like when they have to go to the bathroom, they're rocking in their chairs. You see people, probably lots of you guys are like, I've been doing this all day, and you're starting to lose your attention a little bit. Okay. So you're going to be more, there's going to be more movement. So let them do that. It's how the brain pays attention, believe it or not. The importance of language. Language builds self-esteem, internalize of language, but it also can confuse people. So limit your language. Break things down, break multi-step instructions down into chunks, and then get them to go off and do something. Okay. Essentially, go to the weight room and do these things, and then come back when you're done and tell me, and then you're going to give them the next piece of the instruction. Self-esteem, as you guys know, athletes, all of us, but athletes, especially high-end athletes, they are finicky when it comes to their self-esteem. So part of the coaching thing is understanding where their mindset is at and helping them with their self-esteem, which is their internalized language. How are you speaking to them? How are you giving them feedback? Anyone with ADHD is way more susceptible to things like anxiety and depression, and if not, just low self-esteem in general in certain areas. Sports is one way that they bolster that up. They could be, part of my language, a shit show everywhere else in their life, but when they come into the athletic arena, bam, they're alphas. So try not to tarnish that too much, because then if they're not high-performing athletes, then who are they? Right. And a lot of high performing athletes have a little bit of perfectionism, a little bit of anxiety, but that's what makes them high performers. But if it's not managed properly, it's also what makes them very critical of themselves, which can lead to things like anxiety and depression. The last thing that I'll say is, really, as coaches, why is this all important? Coaches, I just watched, it was a while ago now, but the show's years old, but it was on Friday Night Lights, and I think I mentioned this last time. And it's about a football. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's about a football coach and a football team in a small town. It's about a whole bunch of stuff. It's all layered and stuff. But what was really cool about it is how the coach is basically the psychologist, the counselor, the confidant, the actual coach. You guys as coaches have huge influence and huge power over the athletes that you work with in all sorts of ways that go outside of the sport itself. So it's a huge privilege with it, maybe some burden, but it's really important to understand ADHD and understand your athletes, because you have a monumental influence over who they are, who they believe they are, and it's just such a privilege for all of you. So make sure that you're educating yourselves around mental health, educating yourself around ADHD, because you really can shape the lives of the athletes just in sport and outside as well. So that's all I have for you. Sorry it went a little bit longer and I talked a mile a minute, but we got it all through. You can have my slides. If you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, you can take a breath, John. So I did put another Menti in the chat. It's the same link. So just to make it a little bit easier, you guys can put those questions up and I'll share them on the screen so John can see them. And so just if you have that question as well that somebody else already answered, you can see it. So John here, you can stop sharing and I'll share mine here. Oh, that's a ADHD desktop.
Doesn't make me feel so bad about mine now.
I know. Yeah, I did a lot of nodding in that. I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, can you comment about some of the medications? That's the first question.
Yeah. Okay, so medication, again, you guys all have to be very careful about your athletes and different governing bodies. Now, medication is a stimulant medication. And a lot of people are like, why would you put someone who's fidgety and impulsive on a stimulant? It stimulates dopamine and norepinephrine, which gives you that chemical filter. So stimulant medication, typically nowadays, they're all mostly the same, more or less. They last between 10 and 12 hours. And not like back in my day, like if someone had Ritalin, you can do, or in college, you can do all sorts of stuff. You can take it and go clubbing, you can snort it, you can do all sorts of stuff and abuse it. The medications nowadays, like Concerta and Bifentin and Vyvanse and some of those things, they essentially need to be digested and then enter into your bloodstream. And really, like Vyvanse is that it needs a liver enzyme to cleave off the actual medication. So long gone are the days that you can really abuse this stuff and get an ultimate high. But so that's just one thing. But the medication, actually, all it's really doing is holding dopamine and norepinephrine longer in the synaptic cleft. So therefore, you have more dopamine, norepinephrine, thereby more attention and more self-control and more impulse control. Basically, it boosts up your behavioral inhibition, so you have a chance to think about your behaviors and to pay attention to what you want to pay attention to. People with ADHD pay attention to everything. That's the problem. They're not. People are always like, "Oh, you're not paying attention." Oh, yeah, they are. It's just to everything. Right? Instead of listening to Amy, I'm looking out the window and I'm listening to my dog and all sorts of stuff. I'm paying attention to everything. I'm not necessarily, but people with ADHD are. So the medication just helps that focus and gives them more dopamine and norepinephrine. It's the gold standard intervention.
Excuse me, we have a couple more questions, but I quickly just wanted to say thanks to John for those who have to leave at 7:30. Thanks to John, and we did record this, so we will get that uploaded and it'll be available probably on YouTube for about a week or a week and a half, depending on kind of the interest level, so you guys can revisit it or potentially share it with some other folks in your networks. But quick, thanks, John. That was amazing. Honestly, it was so good. Hopefully you guys learn some new strategies and understand ADHD better and help support your athletes. So for those who need to jump off, that's great. And then I'll let John keep answering a couple more questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, for those of you that are leaving and those of you that have said thank you, I appreciate it. Hopefully you've got something out of it. Now I think it's about just making it your own and just using this as part of your learning process, I guess. So thank you for attending. What was the first? Yeah, I'm gonna interpret this the way I think, but jump in if I'm not. I think you're referring to like being disruptive or setting a bad example or whatever it may be. Is that how you're reading that as well, Amy, or whoever wrote that?
I think it was Frank. Was that you, Frank? You can just top off your mic if you want.
Yes, thank you, John, for the whole presentation. And I think you've alluded to some of the effects that are happening within the training group or in the team, as coming from a person with ADHD, being inattentive or disruptive,
yeah,
or even buddying up, as you suggest, where maybe that other athlete is thinking like, that doesn't help me, that's not great, or other effects that are happening as having a person with ADHD in the middle and having different effects on different people in the group.
Yeah, and that is the risk for sure. That's why, like, when the buddy system, for example, there has to be team cohesion already. Like, there has to be an inclusive type of environment and relationship. You can get away with anything, actually, even in really bad ways. when it comes to relationships. So you can buddy people up if you have strong relationships. So as a coach, you really have to be quite selective, because you're right. There are some people like, get the hell out of here. I don't care that you're inattentive. I'm focused on myself. So there can be some negative group dynamics, but typically what happens is with people with ADHD, there's going to be a negative group dynamic anyways, because the group is tired of the coach being interrupted. They're tired of, I don't know what your coaching style is, but they're tired of getting into shit. Right? When it comes to team sports, like those of us that played team sports, one person's not paying attention and you're all skating, you're all doing extra push-ups, you're all doing all sorts of stuff. So yes, it's going to have an impact if you're not careful. But ADHD, if it's not managed through, say, a buddy system, to your point, it's going to have a negative impact anyway. So it's about being kind of strategic around that. But yeah, not everyone's going to be open to that for sure. So you have to be strategic, and you might not be able to do some of the stuff. Yeah. When there's issues of bullying or conflict, are these kids blamed more often? Yeah, they are blamed more often. Because the bullying things, I got to be careful with the bullying thing. So yes, they're blamed more often. Typically what happens is that they do get into a little bit more trouble, mostly minor trouble, and then they get a stigma and they get a label. So if, again, I'm just say Frank and I are doing whatever we're doing and we're playing something in the gym, and then we leave and something happened to the gym, something got wrecked. Well, who's more likely to have wrecked it, Frank or I? Right? Really, it was Amy that broke it, but no one even knew she was in there because she's so nice. Of course, she couldn't break anything, but because me and Frank are impulsive and rambunctious, obviously we're the ones that broke the weight room. So yes, they get blamed for more things, but typically it's because they get a label put on them because they have done more things.
I was a bit of a teacher's pet, so I never got in much trouble.
Right, exactly.
Last one.
Is there a way I can help her focus on the task at hand? Are we talking about Amy? Who's she here? Is there a way that I can help? Yeah. So, to help people stay focused, it's really about novelty and short direction, and then immediate feedback. Right? Even for me, when I saw people like texting, like even right now, I'm oh, thanks, John, great information. I'm like, oh, thank God, okay, someone got something from it. Right? There's immediate feedback that I feel good, and I'm paying attention to that. So it's about breaking things down, being their external frontal lobe. Okay. So if I start drifting off and he was like, hey, where are you going? I'm like, oh yeah, shit, sorry. Yeah, I'm on. So helping them and being their external frontal lobe and seeing the environment and then helping them through that is a good way to help people pay attention. And it's about breaking things down and those broken down steps or tasks and then reinforcing immediately. So you're alluding to, like, one was about bullying in a kid, but essentially if you look at school, if you look at sports, if you give me a big concept and I'm sitting there, I have to work through it or I have to work through an essay, that I only get one chunk of feedback. I get it at the end. Right at the end of practice, if the coach is like, hey, good job, you guys, and by guys I mean people, you guys all did a really good job, high five. Well, that feedback came an hour or 2 hours after a session. But if you're giving me feedback after every drill, that's authentic. It can't be not authentic because I know you're full of shit and therefore it's not landing on me. But if you give me feedback after, like, hey, I like the effort, even though I screwed up the drill, but I did it really with a lot of effort, give me the effort feedback and then give me the corrective feedback about how I screwed up the drill. So paring things down, short communication, and immediate feedback more often is a way to help people concentrate for sure.
Love it, John. Lots of great feedback in the comments. You're crushing it. It's a great work. So again, thanks everyone. Thanks coaches. Happy Coaches Week. Thank you for doing this. This is, as an athlete, with ADHD, all this is like, yeah, I'm resonating with all of it. And so I appreciate you guys taking the time out and want to support athletes, because yeah, coaches have a huge impact on all of us as athletes. And so yeah, keep up the great work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you guys, happy Coaching Week. Thank you so much for having me. Any questions, let Amy know. She can email me. Sorry about the pace I was talking. I was trying to get it all in, but it was awesome. Thanks for having me, and take care. Amy, do you need a word with me or anything, or am
No,
I
you're good.
Okay,
yeah.
awesome.
I'll text your chat over there. See you, John.
Yeah, sounds good.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.